Here are some questions the Western leaders need to answer. Israel hasn't admitted responsibility for bombing Iranian embassy, but I think it is widely accepted now that it was Israel who bombed it, because there is no evidence to prove otherwise. Every embassy is representing the sovereignty of that nation. So when Israel had bombed the Iranian embassy in Damascus, they had violated that international law. So who condemned it? Did America condemn it? Did Canada condemn it? Did United Kingdom condemn it? No, there was not even a general condemnation that, with a caveat, okay, bombing any embassy is a violation of international law, and a country has the responsibility to respond. We didn't see any such condemnation. There was not even a condemnation with a caveat. August 7, 1998, US embassies were bombed in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and in Nairobi, Kenya. 220 people died. What was the American response? What did President Bill Clinton order? In response, on August 20, 1998, President Bill Clinton ordered Operation Infinite Reach. Infinite Reach.
Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan because of the imminent threat they presented to our national security. 2 weeks ago, 12 Americans and nearly 300 Kenyans and Tanzanians lost their lives, and another 5,000 were wounded when our embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam were bombed. There is convincing information from our intelligence community that the bin Laden terrorist network was responsible for these bombings. But there have been and will be times when law enforcement and diplomatic tools are simply not enough, when our very national security is challenged, and when we must take extraordinary steps to protect the safety of our citizens. And so this morning, based on the unanimous recommendation of my national security team, I ordered our armed forces to take action to counter an immediate threat from the bin Laden network. Earlier today, the United States carried out simultaneous strikes against terrorist facilities and infrastructure in Afghanistan.
Cruise missiles were fired at locations in Sudan and Afghanistan. So America responded with cruise missiles. I think we have forgotten that, right? But even then, there were skeptics who were questioning the justification of that American response.
Well, let us at least give you a little more background about the issues that caused the United States to strike on Osama bin Laden's suspected terrorist camp and on the camp in Sudan, which he said was a chemical weapons-related center. I really must underscore that we have a lot more questions than we have answers at this point. Most importantly, the President's statement that these groups were planning additional attacks on the United States. Our military analyst, Tony Cordesman, has joined us now. And Tony, I should say that you'll be speculating along with us until we find out some facts about this. But what do you make of today's event?
Well, it's remarkably quick. Only yesterday, senior State Department officials were saying that the evidence was pointing toward bin Laden, but were unwilling to confirm that this was the case. And it's not an easy target. We talk about hitting the infrastructure, but a lot of these are going to be buildings with very little in them. And bin Laden himself may be very difficult to find and has at least some hardened or cave-like facilities. The other question that I think many people are going to ask is that the Islamic Jihad...
Good afternoon.
Tony, we have to go to the Pentagon
As
now.
you've already heard from President Clinton, we have today conducted military strikes at several facilities that have supported international terrorist groups. The United States and the rest of the community of civilized nations have made it clear time and time again that the violence and the bloodshed and the murderous acts of international terrorists will not be tolerated. Today's military strikes against those terrorist camps and facilities are part of a continuing effort to defend U.S. citizens and interests abroad against the very real threat posed by international terrorists. In the wake of the tragic and treacherous attacks on our embassies in East Africa, and in light of the continuing patterns of specific threats against U.S. citizens and facilities, we've taken these actions to reduce the ability of these terrorist organizations to train and equip their misguided followers, or to acquire weapons of mass destruction for their use in campaigns of terror. We recognize that these strikes will not eliminate the problem, but our message is clear. There will be no sanctuary for terrorists, and no limit to our resolve to defend American citizens and our interests, our ideals of democracy and law against these cowardly attacks. Those who attack our people will find no safe place, no refuge from the long arm of justice.
But when Iran attacked Israel, who started it? Who started it? Israel. So why do we see unequivocal condemnation of Iranian attack? Why don't we see the Western leaders condemning it, saying the bombing was wrong in Damascus, and Iranian response was, well, let's put it this way, at least they could say their response was too harsh. There's nothing as such. So this is hypocrisy.
And I think a reckless and dangerous thing for Iran to have done. And I think the whole world can see all these countries that have somehow wondered.
What would Britain do if a hostile nation flattened one of our consulates?
Well, we would take the very strong action.
And Iran would say that that's what they did?
Well, what they did, as I said, was a massive attack.
So they were right to respond, but they overreacted, is that what you're saying?
Whenever pro-Israelis defend Israel, they say that it was Hamas who started on October 7, whenever we are condemning Israeli genocide. But they conveniently forget to condemn Israel for the Damascus attack. Why?
Madam President, as we informed in our letter last night in response to the Israeli regime's recurring military aggression, particularly its armed attack on 1st April 2024 against Iranian diplomatic premises, in defiance of Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations, the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran carried out a series of military strikes on Israeli military objectives with dozens of missiles and drones. Iran's operation was entirely in the exercise of Iran's inherent right to self-defense as outlined in Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations and recognized by international law. This concluded action was necessary and proportionate. It was precise and only targeted military objectives and carried out carefully to minimize the potential for escalation and prevent civilian harm.